anything untoward.
Okay, you've been warned, everybody.
Anything you say can be used against you.
That's right.
Or it could be inscribed for ages.
And now notice everybody stops talking once the recording is on.
I have noon, so you might just want to get started and people can join us as they want. It's a small group so far, but that might change.
Let's wait a minute or two.
Okay.
I noticed that last week too, it took a little time till people got on. Hi, Luther. Hi, Gertie. Hi, Carol. I don't know if it's Carol and Mark or just Carol.
Hi.
Hi.
This is like romper room when I was younger. And they would
Yeah.
hold up at the end. They never said Audrey. She never said hi, Audrey. So Layla, if you'd like to say hello to me, I'd really appreciate it.
Hi, Audrey. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get going because it is 12:01. Let's begin with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, well, this is a momentous parsha because it is the last one in Sefer Shmot in the book of Exodus, and next week we begin Vayikra, Leviticus. In the Aleph program where I teach, we actually have a course called Learning to Love Leviticus, because it is considered to be one of the more difficult books to love, but it's actually a very, very interesting and very, very important book. So we will be starting next week with that. Today we are studying Pikudei, as I mentioned, the last parsha in Exodus. And Pikudei, the word Pikudei means accounts, and that's where we're going to start. So we're going to read together, if someone will read for us, in chapter 38 of Exodus, from verse 21, which is the beginning of Parashat Pikudei. Can someone read there, please? Carol?
Mute.
Chapter
These-
38, verse 21.
Until the end of the chapter.
Until verse 31. Till the end of the chapter.
Gotcha. These are the records of the tabernacle of the pact, which were drawn up at Moses' bidding, the work of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron the priest. Now, Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, had made all that the Lord had commanded Moses. At his side was Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, carver and designer, and embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and in fine linen. All the gold that was used for the work, in all the work of the sanctuary, the elevation offering of gold, came to 29 talents and 730 shekels by the sanctuary weight. The silver of those of the community who were recorded came to 100 talents and 1,775 shekels by the sanctuary weight. A half shekel a head, half a shekel by the sanctuary weight for each one who was entered in the records from the age of 20 years up. 603, 550 men. The 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets for the curtain. 100 sockets to the 100 talents, a talent, a socket. And of the 1,775 shekels, he made hooks for the posts, overlay for their tops, and bands around them. The copper from the elevation offering came to 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. Of it, he made the sockets for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the copper altar and its copper grating, and all the utensils of the altar, the sockets of the enclosure round about, and the sockets of the gate of the enclosure, and all the pegs of the tabernacle, and all the pegs of the enclosure round about.
Thank you. So they're really going down into the nitty-gritty details. And they start out with Pikudei, with Ela Pikudei. These are the accounts. Now, Audrey, if you could put up the screen share of the source sheet. In Midrash Tanhuma, which is a series of 3 books in the Talmudic era, if you could raise it up just a little bit, you will see that they realize that they need to have good bookkeepers, and more than one. This is one of the origins later on of, not later on because it's in Exodus already, but into Jewish law of having at least 2 witnesses and at least having 2 people together as trustees over the private funds. Let's read this because we can then see how the accounting is done. So can someone read from the Sages Taught? Shlomo?
From Midrash Tanhuma, Mishnah Shkalim 3:2, the sages taught, always appoint at least 2 people together as trustees over private funds. Even Moses, who enjoyed the full trust of God, as it is written, Numbers 12:7, in all my house he is trusted, figured the accounts of the sanctuary together with others, as it says, by the hand of Itamar, the son of Aaron, and Bezalel and Aholiab were partners in the use of the funds for the artistic work of the Mishkan. Go on. Thus the sages taught. The one who made the appropriation of the monies donated to the holy temple did not enter the chamber wearing a hemmed cloak or shoes or sandals or tefillin or an amulet, nothing in which money can be hidden, lest if he became poor, people might say that he became poor because of an iniquity committed in the chamber, or if he became rich, people might say that he became rich from the appropriation in the chamber. For it is a man's duty to be free of blame before men as before God.
So here you clearly have a system of checks and balances. You have a system of supervision. There have to be at least 2. And from what we understand, there were sometimes more than 2 overseers and trustees in the chamber of the Mishkan to oversee the wealth that was being brought in various forms and the details of the Mishkan. And this flowed over into all the practices, the monetary and material practices of the Mishkan and later into the Beit HaMikdash. So we see that from earliest times, we have a financial, I don't know what the words are in the financial business, but would that we had in our previous administration such good supervision, and God willing, we have that same administration now. So now let's go on to the details. This will probably be the last time that we're going to look at the details of the Mishkan and all of that. And we've just read a part of it, but we don't need to read this again because we've just read through it. From chapter 38, verse 24 and on, we're going to have many, many, many details. All the gold used for the work, the talents and shekels and the silver and the half a shekel of the head. All of this we've just read. And for the breastpiece and for the ephod and the gold and purple and crimson yarns and everything else. So go down just a little bit more, Audrey. So let's ask the question now, why is every detail, tiny and large, described in such detail in the building of the Mishkan? And what we're going to be looking at here are some thoughts about details in our lives. But some thoughts from you first. Why all those details? And we've discussed this before, but let's reiterate it just a bit. Why all the details? Yes, Audrey. You're muted. And I can't see you right now. There you are. You're muted, Audrey. You're still muted.
Okay, there I go. Sorry for that. Well, there was a teaching I heard a few weeks ago about the details, which I thought was very interesting. As a reaction to the golden calf, which was kind of thrown together by the nervousness of the people, by the chaos of what was going on, the uncertainty, the reaction to the detail of putting the Mishkan together and all of the aspects of it was like a counter to the chaos of the golden calf, and the idea that there was such intentionality and planning and bringing people together to knit together a community and a joint effort to create this Mishkan was in some ways a way to counter what had the experience that had happened with the golden calf. I thought that was very interesting, so that the details are important and the way we do it with such deliberation and care and concern was it was intentional.
Right, because the golden calf, in contrast, was just slapped together at the
Correct.
last minute. And this was very intentional and mindful, absolutely. Ralph?
Yeah, I also it also seems strange that you have this ragtag group in the middle of the desert. They're not really grounded yet, and they go into this level of. It almost seems like this could have been something that was done later and then backtracked into the desert. Is that possible? That when
Well,
they were more established?
it's possible that the text is a little later. But what's clearly happening here is that there's some sort of an organizational principle that's being evinced here, that the people, like in many other aspects of their lives in the wilderness, they are getting themselves organized. They are a hodgepodge people. They are a mixed multitude. The word in Hebrew, asafsuf, that is used for them, it's literally ragtag. It's in modern Hebrew, asafsuf is the detritus, or the debris that is left on the streets, the trash that is left on the streets after a parade. So that's what the people are described as. And here they are, this ragtag people, doing something extremely organized. They are bringing hundreds and perhaps thousands of items. And now they are, with ledger books, writing everything down very carefully. They have overseers, and each detail is cataloged. Each detail is registered as it is placed in the Mishkan. Shlomo?
Well, I see this is really part of the transition from individuals, tribes to now a nation. And this process that we're reading about is a continuation of what began as soon as Yitro came to them when they got to Sinai, and he talked about organizing different, I don't know if I actually want to say courts, but different levels of people to hear the different complaints in a hierarchical way. So this organization of a nation or of a people has been going on for a while, since they've been at Sinai and before.
That's right. Luther?
Well, this was originally oral tradition.
Yes.
And these were stories that were told over and over and over again. Certainly, one of the ways that we can remember things is is by fixating on the details. So those details were important because they helped the teller, but they also helped the listener because this is really cool stuff. This is really, really hot stuff, and it may seem a little boring to us now because we're jaded. You know, there's no real plot here. There's just all this stuff being listed. But it probably was enthralling to a bunch of dirt farmers and shepherds sitting around the campfire at night. It probably just had them spellbound.
Sure, sure. When you have crimson yarns and you have golden painted wood and you have all of these things, it is very, very enthralling to them. And at the same time, they want to protect it and they want to make sure that it's taken care of in the most intricate details. Bob Barkin?
Um, I think it was Mies van der Rohe who said that God is in the details.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about architecture, which this is. And I think the fact is that it makes things seem so real that if you talk about very broad structures and um, broad concepts, it became it when you get down to the details, that's where it really matters. And if you try to and I think the Torah understands that it makes it all that much more real.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think Luther's comment is very apt here. Is that for us it's not terribly enthralling. For us, it's boring, but for them, it was quite important. Bob Singer.
I I was thinking that each of these items and colors may have had some specific cultural implication. In current days, if we say I have a menorah or I have a seven candle menorah, uh, most Jews could tell a story about what that is and what it means. And I think in the oral tradition, the different items each had implications that we might not understand nowadays, but might have been symbolic of just culturally significant points.
Right, and and they were. The crimson yarn is royalty, as is the purple, and each one has its own significance and meaning, which they knew well, and that is pretty foreign to us without explanation. Um, Bruce.
Yeah, I felt a couple things that were strange to me. Number one, they go through all these details. They don't mention anything about the artisans, the experts who have had to build this and do this construction. It gives the impression as if the common man, anybody, can come and make these decisions and construct it. And that's one thing. Also, I was surprised in all the details, they never mentioned the wages, the pay they would have to have had to be made for these artisans, for these experts. I don't really understand why that was ignored. This can't be done just by anybody to build something this detailed. And as I said, the details, a lot of this had to be made by some artisans, some experts.
Well, Bruce, actually, we spoke about this last week. I'm not sure if you were
Okay,
here.
I wasn't there. I'm sorry.
We spoke about Betzalel and Oholiav, and that Betzalel were very skilled artisans, and they mention them again here. that there
Okay.
is Betzalel means Betzelem Elohim, and Ochaliav means the tent of my father, and that they were considered to be the great artisans of the Mishkan, and that they represent the spark of God or the image of God in the building of the Mishkan, and they had with them a whole team of artisans. But the fact that the two great artisans of the Mishkan have names like that is very significant. It kind of indicates that the expertise and the artisanry that they hold is really that they are the hands of God. They are the instruments of God in designing and supervising and building the Mishkan. As far as the wages, that's an interesting thing that never occurred to me before, but is really quite interesting, because in Parashat Vayakel, which we discussed last week, all of this seems to have been, all of the contributions seems to have been voluntary. So the question is, did the workers who actually did the building, were they too volunteers? And it's not clear. The text doesn't give us any inkling of that, whether they were wage laborers or not. I would suspect that it was voluntary.
What do they need money for?
Exactly. There was no currency at this point other than possessions, and I don't think that there was wages at this point. Okay, let's go on. Carol, and then
Yes,
after Carol, Malka, and then we'll go on to our next points.
thank you. Thank you. I'm impressed by how visual and dazzling, beautiful colors are important here. And I imagine it's because they have been so starved for any visual interest in the desert. Everything must be kind of brown and sere, and like a starving man runs through all the menus that he wishes he could be partaking of. So it's especially visual and also very tactile. That doesn't, I'm sure they've had plenty of tactile experiences, but the visual stuff seems to be filling a need. That's my comment.
Of course it would, given where they are in the very stark wilderness, and then they're building this sublime, splendid, beautiful palace of a place. Absolutely. Malka?
So I think that all the details are there so that there wouldn't be any disagreements as to how to do things. And because there's this saying, if you ask two Jews a question, you get three answers. So this was so that there would be cohesiveness and a purpose and a way to do it, so that really you wouldn't even waste time or have to do a redo.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Audrey, could you move this forward? Move us up? The next few views are very typical of a Jewish practice, which is to spiritualize the mundane or to spiritualize the prosaic. And that's what happens in these next few views. So let's look at the next one, if we can raise it just a little bit more, from the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. 13 chapters are devoted to describing how certain physical materials were fashioned into an edifice dedicated to the service of God. In contrast, the Torah devotes one chapter to its account of the creation of the universe, 3 chapters to its description of the revelation at Mount Sinai, and 11 chapters to the whole story of the Exodus. The overwhelming emphasis on its construction itself implies that in our lives too there is something very special about forging our personal resources into things that have a potential to serve God. When we do the intricate and painstaking labor of construction, When we do the actual work of crafting each and every tiny material object into the greater whole for God, we engage in a transformative process when something material is forged into an instrument of the divine. So our lives, the details of our lives, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, are our service to God and become spirit oriented. So the question is, have you ever done any intricate, detail oriented work that has brought about the creation of something greater than the sum of its parts? Did you or your perspective change along the way? Have you ever engaged in some detail oriented task that has somehow transformed you or changed you? Any thoughts on that? Malka?
Okay. Yes, I do that all the time with my artwork. In fact, right now I'm involved with doing fabric artwork and making sculptural forms out of it. And I do pieces, and then it's intricate pieces, and then I bring it together. And in the end, it's way larger than the sum of its parts. And so I think of that all the time.
Right. It's the creation process, and it does enter into your heart and into your soul in a different way. And there are lots of little details there that create the whole. Shlomo?
I have a question, which would be, does it only refer to physical work?
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
I find myself sometimes thinking about some of the things we've read or discussed, or writing a Dvar Torah, or I shouldn't, trying to write a Dvar Torah, I should say, and thinking about things, and it becomes quite detailed and intricate. And some of the things that I end up thinking about and that end up coming out of these Divrei Torah are certainly, I don't know if I want to say transformative, but somewhere along those lines. So is it only referred to physical work here?
No, not at all. Not at all. I can certainly tell you that writing my book recently was a transformative experience for me, and I think about what I wrote and think about what meant the most to me, and also what now, just a year later, I might write differently because of my experience of it. So it's been quite a journey, and that wasn't physical. That was spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and so on. Absolutely. Camilla?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something that I had a personal experience, but it also, I think it applies more to our modern world, is when I had to learn to do laboratory work, I was a scientist. To really do laboratory work and be good at it, you have to be, at that time, the way laboratory work was done, you had to be so careful and so precise. I mean, almost like they're laying out, it has to be exactly this many grommets, and you better keep track of it, and you better write it down. So, I mean, the more I think of it, it is very much like this Torah portion.
Right, right. You were in the process of building a scientific mishkan. Nice
Or
way of thinking of it.
hoping to, yeah.
Good, good. Any other thoughts on this before we go on? Myrna?
Well, I've been part of a writing group, and I've been writing what I would call like sort of memoir stories, little incidents from my life. And I now have about probably 15 of them. And yeah, the sum of the parts is greater than, the individual stories. And it just occurred to me that this is an example of, yeah, I think eventually I probably put them together into some kind of a, collection of stories of my life. So that will be more than the individual stories.
Right, and then they leave, then they have
A legacy of their own. Yeah.
a legacy of their own for your children and your
Mhm.
grandchildren.
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, let's go on to the next one. B, Life is in the Details by Rabbi Eric Weiss. Can someone read this one, please?
I'll do that.
Thank you.
Written in the context of a hospital setting. It's true that in a hospital or in a nursing home or other new circumstances that alter our daily routine, we were actually missed are to the details of life. Suddenly, we can't pick up our watch from the place we put it the night before. We can't make our own coffee or tea or our own mug. We can't shuffle around our home, taking in the morning and evening details in our surroundings. Suddenly, we are bereft of the details that allow us to be in our familiar world. And in their place are typical new details, the pills, the tests, the doctors, nurses, social worker, chaplain, and we may long to once again have all those at-home details back. And while we may take comfort in the external details of our own lives, being in transition or in the hospital, for example, is also a time that lends itself to reflect upon the internal details of our bodies, hearts, and souls. It is natural to move into some kind of reflection about our past, our current situation, and our hopes for the future. In the detail of today, what are some of the simple details of your own life that you miss?
So, have you ever experienced a change of circumstances that has radically changed the details of your life? What details have you missed? Have you thought about creating the details of your new life? Has this brought useful introspection? I know, for example, that when I had my knee replacement surgery, suddenly I was in a situation where I couldn't walk for a period of time. I was with a walker. I had to do physical therapy. I had to do all of those kinds of things. And the simple, most minor details of my life were altered for a period of time. I couldn't simply walk to the kitchen and get a cup of tea. I couldn't do many things for about 2 or 3 months until I was finally fine again. And it really made me think about the details of a daily life. And I wonder about that. And I wonder about how we think we cavalierly take our lives for granted. And we need to think much more carefully about the details of our life. Now I see Malka, is your hand up again?
Yes,
That's
yes.
fine. I just wasn't sure if you hadn't lowered it and raised it again. So please go ahead.
Okay, so I'll try to do this quickly, but my daughter Aviva just had a baby 3 weeks ago.
Mazel tov.
So and I spent 5 days with her in the hospital. So that really changed things. And not only that, but she's living with us for another 3 months. So and we're taking turns taking care of the baby. So my shift is from 3 a.m. to 6 in the morning. And also, so like the whole house is being changed all still. Our schedule, our sleep deprivation. So I know what this is all about.
Right. The painful of the 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. and then also the joyful of holding that precious new baby. All of it has changed. Ralph and then Carol.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that a big change for me would, if I go back a ways, was my Lech Lecha moment when I went off to college. And this home that I grew up in, my parents, I all of a sudden was in a different environment. And my life has shifted to a whole different set of priorities and seriousness. And, so that almost seems to fit some of this discussion.
Absolutely. And you grew up. You grew up because of that change, and you had to fend for yourself in ways that you never had to before. All of that is changed. It's amazing how the circumstances of life change because the details of life change. Absolutely. Carol?
Yes, and congratulations, Malka, on your addition. I'm thinking about a subtraction. My husband died in 2002, and I was struck by things like no one turned off the coffee pot, no one checked to make sure the doors were locked at night. The worst was when I kept bouncing checks because he did all the bills, and it didn't occur to me to put money into the bank. I knew how to take it out, but I hadn't been responsible for putting it in. And it was that when a detail like that struck me, the wave of grief was intense. It was so strong. I thought I was doing fine, and then suddenly the coffee pot was still on. And that's a change in detail.
Right. It's a monumental change of life, and new details come and new demands come. And you have to think about creating and shaping a new life. And
Right.
it's a great emotional challenge. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's look at C, the next one down. Artistic details in a difficult life can uplift our spirits. Can someone please read that one? How about if I call on someone? Shlomo, you've read already, so
Okay.
I'll read it.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Artistic details in a difficult life can uplift our spirits. Rabbi Erwin Goldenberg taught in the name of Rabbi Levi Olin. Why did the Israelites build such an elaborate tabernacle? Moses recognized that Israel needed such a tabernacle to carry them through the forbidding desert of their lives and to serve as a vision of the beauty that life can and should contain. In the wilderness, the Israelites struggled with depression and hopelessness. Their bodies were battered by the hot, sandy desert wind, and their mouths were parched by thirst. They were anxious about their uncertain future. However, when they stood in the tabernacle, they probably experienced awe, wonder, and mystery to the point of hearing the angels sing, "Holy, holy, holy." Religion is less a theology, philosophy, or code of behavior than it is an art. So Moses was right when he took all possible steps to make sure that the first sanctuary was a thing of beauty.
So, in a difficult personal time, have you sought to brighten your life by buying flowers? Have you worked on creating something beautiful, like Malka does, even in the midst of depression? Do things of beauty lift your spirits when you are down? A second question. In a Shiva house, the mirrors are covered, and when Shiva is over, they are uncovered, and the mourners take a walk around the block. What do they see? The beauty of their own faces, the beauty of the world, the beauty of the Mishkan that is the world. So, how do we cope with adversity? How do we cope with the different? Let's see. Let's Joan and then Luther. Joan, you need to unmute.
I think I can share something here. When COVID started, I all of a sudden we're home all the time, right? So like Malka, I started thinking, what kind of things could I do that would occupy me so I'm just not just watching television all the time, in the evenings especially. So I've always knitted and crocheted. And so for a whole year, I did a different pattern each night with different kinds of yarn. And then as it just sort of dragged on, I started to think about, well, what am I going to do with all these different pieces, these different swatches? And so now we're in our third year. I've started to crochet around the edges, and I don't know what it's going to become. I think it's going to become some kind of wall hanging or maybe a bedspread or something like that. So it's been very therapeutic. And so I think that's what this is talking about here.
Uh-huh. It's amazing to see what's going to happen with it. And Malka points out that you made their Lila a puppet.
Oh yeah, I used to make puppets a lot, but it gets old after a while. So now I'm doing all these different patterns instead. So
But it's wonderful what the creative projects occur in times of difficulty and adversity. Thank you
yeah,
for that.
it helps.
Luther?
Well, mine is also a pandemic story, a lockdown story, because when the pandemic first hit, you felt like you shouldn't go anywhere. You felt like you couldn't go anywhere. And I became much more conscious of what was going on right in my own backyard, so to speak. And it was spring, and the way the flowers came into bloom, the animals that would come up from the park and the birds. And I also started photographing these images that I would see the way the light shines through the leaves at certain times of day, and you know and I didn't want to keep it to myself because I didn't have anything else to talk about anyway, so I would post these things online, um, because I figured it would help other people's morale. I did we did open mics, nights of poetry. One of my neighbors did regular online concerts, song circles, and we were all doing this creative stuff. Like it was like the USO. It was like we needed to rally the troops and improve everyone's morale. But mainly, I think it was just you become conscious in those times of great stress of the beauty of small things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know, for example, that the poetry that you've been posting online has increased. And I've certainly benefited from it. So thank you for that. I wanted, just because the pandemic has come up, I wanted to mention a book that I've received and that has really been of great interest to me. It's called Torah in a Time of Plague: Historical and Contemporary Responses, edited by Rabbi Dr. Aaron Leib Smokler. And it's not a highly academic, uh, cerebral book. It's a book about this experience that we've gone through. Torah in a Time of Plague by Aaron Leib Smokler. And I highly recommend it. I'm going to be teaching a class this summer in the Aleph Ordination program called Job in a Time of Love and COVID. And it's going to be, yes, yeah, you got the illusion. And it's going to be a class that is going to be about Job and Job's sufferings, but also our own sufferings, and centering around not only theodicy and where God has been in all of this, but also things like friendship and uh, where Job's friends succeeded in comforting him and where they failed miserably, and how it connects to our own friends and our own friendship and what the limitations have been for us in maintaining our friendships and comforting each other in this time of pandemic. And so there's a lot there that of adversity brings forth, and I'm thinking very deeply about this subject, so thank you for sharing that. Steve Brody, I thought I saw your hand up and then it went down. Do you still want to make a comment or?
Well, I'll just say, you're talking about what one does. It's a sort of a creative endeavor. I certainly, that acts as a sanctuary or whatever. I guess just getting into nature in general does that for me. It really, either on my bike or on the water or just taking a walk and just sort of marveling at the ecosystem, the natural world that this planet has created. And the other thing I think about is, the big transition for me in the recent years is just shifting into semi-retirement or retirement. And when the challenges of that phase of life, thinking of one's mortality and thinking of one's legacy and how one spends one time, one of the things that really boosts both my intellectual as well as my spiritual side is doing some mentoring that I do through the university that I'm on faculty with. And it's, just talking to these 20-something, 30-something people interested in the space field, which was my field, from around the world, in India or in Argentina or in Australia or in Europe, wherever they may be, and Zooming with these young people who have such a big life ahead of them and are seemingly interested in what I have to share from my experiences. So that certainly gives me a boost. And it's not a creative thing I'm producing per se, except for the dialogue creates new thoughts and new ideas. And I learn as much as I'm sure I'm giving in the mentoring sessions.
Well, it definitely has its elements of creativity to it as well. Audrey, can we skip the next few pages because of time? We'll do that some other time. And let's go to page 7 at the bottom. Here we go. Moses' difficult task in anointing Aaron's sons. Can we read together now on Exodus chapter 40, verse 12? Here, Moses is being commanded to bring forth Aaron and his sons to put the vestments on them. I'll read that just for time's sake. You shall bring Aharon and his sons forward to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. Put the sacred vestments on Aharon and anoint him and consecrate him that he may serve me as priest. Then bring his sons forward, put tunics on them, and anoint them as you have anointed their father, that they may serve me as priests. Thus their anointing shall serve them for everlasting priesthood throughout the ages. This Moses did, just as the Lord had commanded him, so he did. So now let's read the next part here. What must have it been like for Moses to anoint Aaron's sons? Can someone please read there? And Audrey, if you can raise up the screen just a little. There we go.
I'll read it if you like.
Thank you, Ralph.
Okay, what must it have been like for Moses to anoint Aaron's sons? Rabbi Samuel Stahl teaches, God ordered Moses to do something that must have been very uncomfortable, if not painful for Moses. In being commanded by God to anoint Aaron's sons, the failure of Moses' own sons to reach prominence and distinction must have been particularly painful. Moses' two sons, Gershom and Eleazar, were both non-entities. There is hardly even a mention of them in the Torah. In fact, Joshua, Moses' successor, was not one of his sons. Moses did not seem to derive the pleasure from his children that Aaron, at this point, was able to gain from his. Yet Moses had to anoint his nephews to consecrate them as priests. When Moses anointed Aaron, there was no jealousy. Each brother had his own role in leadership. But in the next generation, perhaps there was a strategy for dealing with Moses' potential jealousy. Moses might have resented the fact that his own children could not have been anointed priests. In fact, there's an ancient midrash in which Moses asked God to transmit his own qualities to his children, and God refused the request. Thus, in essence, God was reminding Moses that he had to anoint Aaron's sons with the same joy and enthusiasm that he had demonstrated when he consecrated their father. Moses must have wanted the best for his children, as we do for ours. When our children are successful, we love to show them off. In the words of Rabbi Harold Schulweis, we yearn to have our children be nachas producing machines for us. We are sometimes jealous of our siblings' children if they overshadow our own kids. We often do, consciously or unconsciously, with our own children, the children of our friends as well. It is sometimes very hard for us to be gracious. In the book Born to Win by Muriel James and Dorothy Jungwald, we learn that winners have a zest for life and without guilt. They enjoy their own accomplishments. They also enjoy the accomplishments of others without envy. One sign of maturity is the ability to derive profound joy from the accomplishments of other people for their own sake, and not for the way that they may make us look better. Rabbi Leila Gelberner, sounds familiar, adds that Moses seems to have had this ability. Later in the Torah, in Numbers 11:27, when Joshua comes to Moses and tells him that the two young men, Eldad and Medad, are prophesying in the Israeli camp, challenging Moses' great authority as the greatest prophet, Moses answers, "Are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people would be prophets, and that the Lord would put the divine spirit upon them." Numbers 11:29. Moses is a great example of a person who possesses the humility of self-confidence.
Okay, so there are two things going on in this section. The first is that we need to hearken back to an earlier part where Moses is an absentee father. It says in a certain section where Moses, in the section with Yitro, that Moses basically leaves his family in order to lead the Israelite people. And it's indicative of his children. His children's names are Eliezer and Gershom. God will help me, and I was a stranger there. And these two boys never seemed to have any kind of real intimate relationship with their father. They seemed to be peripheral to Moses' rise to leadership and to success as the leader of the Israelite people. And when it does come time to establish the priesthood, it's his brothers, it's Moses' brothers, as we've just seen, that he appoints to the priesthood. On one level, he might have thought to himself, Moses might have thought to himself, gee, I wish it would have been my sons. On the other hand, he graciously appoints Aharon's sons, and there doesn't seem to be any jealousy or any enmity in that appointment. But it must have hurt on some level that it wasn't his own line that is being passed into the priesthood. The second thing is that he seems to have had a humility about him, that when Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp of the Israelites, and Joshua comes and says, Moses, there are these two guys out there who are trying to one-up you. He doesn't see it that way. He sees it as a good thing for the Israelite people that there are young men of passion who will succeed him, who will continue in leadership roles after he's gone. And he says, would that all my people would have that spirit of prophecy in them. So he's humble, and he's confident that he will fulfill his role and they will continue after him. So it's kind of an interesting balance that he has here of both perhaps some regret that the line will not continue through him, and at the same time, at least some happiness that there are young men who will continue the leadership beyond him. Joshua, Eldad, Medad, and others. So what it brings up for me and for others, because I've spoken to other people about this, is the whole question of our pride and our regrets in our children. And when I just had a conversation last night with a dear friend, and she was telling me about her own children, and one of them is doing great, is married in a wonderful, happy marriage, and has 2 small children, and the children are doing great and everything else. And the other daughter is doing okay, and everything's going well. And to be candid with you, my daughter isn't doing so well right now. And we didn't have much to talk about my daughter because my daughter's struggling. And I felt the pang of my daughter right now in her life. I'm confident that she will do better in her life at another point. But she wasn't a nachas making machine, as Rabbi Schulweis puts it. And so I think about the dynamic of those great people like Moses and what he might have felt at this time. And I wonder if this resonates with you in any way. Yes, Luther and then Shlomo.
But isn't there a level of irony in all this? Because it's Aaron's 2 sons who bring strange fire to the altar and are consumed. So they don't carry it on. In fact, if I got,
But they weren't the only sons, thank God.
was Eleazar Moses' son or Aaron's son?
There are 2.
There are 2.
There are 2.
Because it's one of the guys named Eleazar actually is the one that carries it on.
Yes, yes. And interestingly enough, if we had time to go into Shmini, which was the parsha where Nadav and Avihu bring the strange fire, there are many midrashim, including my own, where actually they don't turn out to be traitors to the sacrifice. They are the sacrifices themselves. And they are actually holy sacrifices, but that's a very complicated story which we can't go into here. And Shlomo, and you're going to have the final word for today before we celebrate the ending of the book of Exodus.
I'm not sure you want this to be the final word.
Oh, but we only have 2 words.
Well, here's why. I don't think there's anything in the Torah to support anything that Moshe was a good family man. Zipporah does not even invite him to home after he saves her and her sisters she doesn't say a single word to him, and he says nothing at all to her. There's no words that he exchanges with her. The only thing she does with him is she accuses him and rebukes him for being a chatan damim, a bridegroom of blood, because she has to circumcise her son. So, and when Yitro comes with Zipporah and with the 2 boys, he greets Yitro. He doesn't say anything to his wife or his sons.
Right.
And I'm taking away from this that the writers of Torah were telling us, if you're going to have a job like Moshe, you ain't having any good family life.
Right. Right. Well, I agree with you. There is no evidence that Moshe was a good father. And I think that very often the tragedy is that public figures give up their families for their public roles, and that's very, very sad. Okay, we're done with the book of Exodus. Thank you so much for giving me the privilege of guiding you through part of the book of Exodus. And one of the traditional ways we celebrate the end of a book is we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. From strength to strength we shall be strengthened. And it indicates that every time we study Torah together, the Shekhinah is present and we are strengthened by our study. So we are now stronger, and we will now start next week with Vayikra. And I won't have the privilege of ending the book of Vayikra with you, but Rabbi Rachel will be back, and she will have the privilege of ending the book of Vayikra with you, but at least I'll be able to begin the process with you. Okay, see you all next week. Okay.